Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, I had a voice radio. So today, we're going to be looking at Whitney. Now, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/PTCG Radio, the main attraction of which is a bonus podcast, whereby you guys ask me questions, and I do a podcast, usually one a week, whereby I spend a solid hour answering all of your questions. And a brilliant question was asked by Jason Stopka this past week, and he basically was asking about Whitney. Whitney's a new card coming in Lost Thunder. Now, Jason had told me what it did, but, you know me by now, ladies and gentlemen. The first thing I did was run to David Hockman and go, David, is this actually what Whitney does? And David said, yes, Wassy. He doesn't call me Wassy, that'd be weird. He said, yes, Wassy, this is what Whitney does. And I suppose at this point I should probably tell you what Whitney does. Well, she is actually the gym leader of Goldenrod Gym. She hands out a plain badge to trainers that defeat her, and she specializes in normal type Pokemon. Hang on a second, that's not a description of what she does. What she does is she allows you to draw a card. And you might be thinking, hang on a second, Wassy, drawing one card with a supporter, that's not good. There must be something else. Well, of course there is. You also draw 2 cards for every Whitney in your discard pile, not counting this one. So the first Whitney you play draws you 1 card. That's not good. The second Whitney you play draws you 3 cards. That's how. It's literally how. And how is that a good thing? If you're expecting me to stop making these how puns, how would you possibly think that would work? Ha! I'm a little proud of myself. If you play 3 Whitney, then you're up to 5 cards. That's pretty nice. And then if you play your 4th Whitney, you're up to 7 cards. If we add them all up, that takes us to 16 cards drawn using Whitney. Which means you're averaging 4 cards per Whitney. I am not convinced that this is great. Now, to be clear, several people have asked me to look at this card, and I will, in my usual way, go through all the implications of this card and how good it is and how it could be used and all of that. Of course I will, ladies and gentlemen. But I'm not 100% convinced. So, we talked about How a minute ago. How is a supporter card that draws 3 cards. It is just about the most vanilla card you could ever get. It's fine. It's a good card if you're new to the game. It's in a whole bunch of theme decks. It's quite cheap. But I'm not loving it, to be perfectly honest with you. How's not a great card? Now, this does draw you 4, and look, I've made this comparison in a bunch of videos. Cynthia is way better than Tate and Liza because it draws 6 cards rather than 5, and Tate and Liza is way better than Judge as a draw card, not as a disruptor, obviously, because it draws you 5 cards rather than 4. Every extra card is vital in the Pokemon trading card game. So no arguments here about how good and how vital this could be. The argument is it better than the existing cards that we've got? So if we were to take something like Sophocles, for instance, that lets you discard 2 cards from your hand and draw 4 cards. So essentially this is averaging the same as Whitney here. You're drawing 4 cards. Now, Sophocles lets you discard 2 cards from your hand, and as we talked about in the Sophocles video, maybe you're playing something like Malamar, and putting that energy in the discard pile is actually a really good thing, because you can then accelerate it. Or you're playing a Water Deck and Aqua Patch, and it's exactly the same. Or maybe you're playing something like a Darkrai deck, and I know Darkrai's proper job fallen out of favour, but let's humour me, whereby you can get it out of the discard with an energy attached to it onto your bench, and then it's great. But generally speaking, in a lot of decks, any deck that doesn't want to discard cards, being able to just flat out draw 4 is better than discarding 2 and drawing 4. So that kind of makes it better than Sophocles. But then again, we're not playing Sophocles at the moment. I did a video about this the other day, I'll pop a link in the description. But in terms of the supporter cards we've got at the moment, your options are obviously Cynthia, Tate and Liza, Copycat and Judge. They are basically the draw cards we've got. Now, Cynthia gives you a new hand of 6 cards. It's an absolute must-play 4 of in basically every deck. Let's not worry about that. Tate and Liza gets you 5 or a switch. It's nowhere near as good as Cynthia, but it's a pretty good replacement if you're playing for Cynthia, which you will be. But a lot of people are choosing to play Copycat instead. Copycat lets you get a new hand equal to the size of your opponent's hand, but your opponent can play around that by keeping like 1 card in their hand, which is a Cynthia, and then you don't get to really use Copycat for many cards at all. And then you've got Judge, which gives you and your opponent a new hand of 4 cards, which is way better as disruption. But to be perfectly honest with you, we saw at the World Championships this past weekend, a lot of people are just going, Judge, I'm not going to use my supporter to play Judge. Marshadow, baby. Marshadow FTW. But of course, all of those supporters are supporter cards which are shuffle draw. This isn't shuffle draw. This is just pure draw. And in a lot of decks, pure draw is actually better. So I have made no secret of my redonkulous love for the new Incineroar GX, the Darkness one. I'm so hyped for that. But that's a stage 2, which means you want to be drawing a rare candy at the same time as you draw your Incineroar so you can evolve it up. So if you've got a rare candy in hand but you don't have an Incineroar, you don't want to play a Cynthia. Because even though Cynthia is the best supporter in the game at the moment, and I really don't think there's much argument about that, the chances of playing a Cynthia and drawing both the cards you want off of a Cynthia is not that high. However, if you've got one of them in hand and you can draw cards, then you're in a much better position to potentially have both of them at the same time. That, to me, sounds pretty gosh darned tasty. And in terms of pure draw, this might be the best we've got. This is actually really good as pure draw. So why am I upset? Because it's good at the end of the game. No, bad Whitney. Because if I play a Whitney on turn 1, I'm drawing 1 card. That's not good. That's really not good. Even if I play a Whitney on turn 1 and get 1 card, I play a Whitney on turn 2 and it's basically a how. It's only Whitney number 3 and 4 which actually get you to a respectable number of cards. Now, Whitney number 3 drawing 5, yes. Whitney number 4 drawing 7, yes. But I don't like the first 2 Whitneys. Now, I'm sure a lot of you at this point have noticed and are going to point out, maybe you're even yelling at the screen, come on, Wassy, you don't need to play the first 2 Whitneys, and they're right. What you could do is use something like an Ultra Ball to discard 2 Whitneys, and then on turn 1 of the game, you're actually drawing 5 cards. I mean, to be honest, you're probably better off playing Lily on turn 1. But, you know, you can still draw 5. Or you can just dump 3 in the discard, and then your one and only Whitney is drawing you 7. And here's the thing, right? You can then play a Pal Pad and just put 1 Whitney back in your deck. Or you could play a Lusamine, I suppose, but that is your supporter for the turn. And then just grab 1 Whitney back, and that 1 Whitney will draw you 7 cards. And this is the best way to use Whitney. But you're basically having to play cards just so you can discard them, just so later on in the game you can use it. I am not disputing that Whitney number 3 is great and Whitney number 4 is redonk. It's like a Professor Sycamore where you don't have to discard your hand first. Whitney number 4 is brilliant. But your only choices are to play spectacularly underwhelming Whitneys turn 1 and 2. Or, you know, before you play 3 and 4. Doesn't have to be turn 1 and 2. Or you play 4 Whitney just to discard a couple so that Whitneys 3 and 4 are good. And once you get to Whitney 3 and 4, they're great and you can reuse them with stuff like Pal Pad and they're still great and it's awesome. But it's a lot of investment. And those are spaces that could go to other cards in your deck. You could just play a Tate and Liza, or you could play an Oranguru, or something along those lines. So I suppose here's my conclusion on Whitney. Yes, it is a decent card. But you've got to invest. It's got to be a 4. It's 0 or 4. There's no middle ground here. And really, you've got to play 4 of them, knowing that 2 of them are only being played to be discarded, and then you've got to prioritise fairly early in the game discarding them, and I really think you've then got to play Pal Pad so you can reuse them. And under those circumstances, this is a great card. Because you're basically just ending up drawing 5 or 7. And I've said pure draw is great. I would usually rather draw 5 than get a new hand of 6 with Cynthia. It is a useful card, but you've got to invest the deck space and you've got to invest the time at the beginning of the game to actually get it working. And for that reason, I'm giving it between 3 and 4 Wassies. We don't give half Wassies. That would be barbaric. It's useful once you've made the investment. But I want to know what you think about Whitney, so let me know in the comment section. Go nuts, but remember the rule, ladies and gentlemen. Do be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at The Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all of that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.